In case you haven't heard, human beings are warming the planet. The burning of fossil fuels has caused the atmosphere to fill with greenhouse gases, which trap heat. Since the Industrial Revolution, heat-trapping gases like carbon dioxide, CO2, have risen by nearly 50% because of us. More than half of that CO2 is just from the last 30 years. All the extra greenhouse gases have led to an increase in global temperatures of 1.1 degrees Celsius. That may not sound like a lot, but it has caused the last 5 years to be the hottest in recorded history. Rising temperatures have led to more frequent and extreme heat waves, floods, droughts, and hurricanes, because a warmer world also means a wetter one, hence the flooding and the storms. In 2018, extreme weather events, proven to be worsened by climate change, cost taxpayers $91 billion in cleanup, prevention, and restoration in the United States. That doesn't even count the human costs, as hundreds lost their lives to these natural disasters. When we think of the climate crisis, we picture classic images of ice caps melting, sea levels rising, and polar bears drowning. But more than isolated weather events, you're about to see that the climate crisis is more like a fucked up web that connects and impacts every single thing we care about. It amplifies all the existing problems we experience today, from racial injustice to economic inequality to health issues to food access to war. It affects our economies, our politics, and our cultures. So how much trouble are we in legitimately? Rogan asked. I mean, it's pretty bad already, and it's going to get, I think, a lot worse, Wallace Wells replied. As I merged onto the highway, Wallace Wells began to speak in a way that made me feel the urgency and proximity of our climate crisis. The first thing he brought up was the wildfires that ripped through California in 2018. Last year, there were flames hopping over the 405, Wallace Wells said. That visual created a flashback to seeing my homies posting videos all over Instagram when the fires hit LA. It looked like some Mordor end-of-the-world Hollywood shit. And there I was, only 4 months later, just a few dozen miles south of where the hillside had been swallowed by fire, now under a clear blue sky. Everything seemed fine, like beyond fine. Nature was popping off. The hills were glowing with all kinds of flowers that had just bloomed, and there were hundreds of butterflies lazily floating through the air all around me, making their way north in a mass migration from Mexico. It was beautiful. Even though I was safe in that moment, it didn't make any of what Wallace Wells was explaining less true or less terrifying. He went on about the fires. There's scientific estimates that say by the end of the century they will get 64 times worse. That would mean more than half of California burning every year. Wallace Wells then went on to say that climate damages would create about $600 trillion in expenses by the end of the century. To put that in perspective, that's twice as much as all the wealth in the world today. I caught myself laughing, thinking about all the people who say acting on climate is too expensive. Homie was telling me that on our current trajectory, we are moving towards 2 degrees Celsius of warming, which the UN calls a point of disaster and island nations are referring to as climate genocide. By the time we reach that 2 degrees Celsius, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit increase, we'll likely experience the death of almost all coral reefs on the planet, entire polar ice sheets melting in the summer, and about 5 meters, 16 feet of sea level rise. To top it off, we're barreling closer toward a runaway climate scenario that could send us to a 3, 4, or even 5 degrees Celsius temperature rise. And apparently, a 2-degree increase is our best case scenario. That's the fuckest best case scenario I've ever heard. Joe Rogan and I were both shook. This moment brought back memories of how it all started for me. At age 6, when I asked my mom how people can live their lives every day, go to school and go to work without thinking about this. This being that humans are causing the greatest environmental catastrophes on Earth. Wallace Wells spoke about how, even for someone like him who has read thousands of scientific papers on the topic and understands the urgency of the climate crisis, part of him still doesn't want to admit the reality of the world we have created. For those of us privileged enough to not be directly faced with the crisis on a daily basis, our instinct is to turn away and to leave the problem to the UN, world leaders, and activists. We do everything in our power to keep this story as far from our world as we possibly can. When we deny our roles and ignore the imminent danger that is already affecting our planet, we relinquish our responsibility to change anything about the way we're living. I let it all wash over me. Even after 13 years of speaking, writing, and thinking about this issue, it never felt quite this big. I felt angry and overwhelmed. But even as the podcast wrapped up,
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.